Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. I know I'm running from one meeting to another, so I'll give folks another minute before we kick things off. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. As always, I really appreciate all the time you're willing to dedicate to these sessions. Let's do our intros in the chat, please. We've got a great conversation lined up for today, a presentation about a previous residential energy efficiency program that hopefully will have some lessons learned and open up a discussion for all of us. Just in case by now you don't know me, this is Maddie Kohler with NASEO. NASEO's person in on all of these rebate conversations. And also, per usual, just in case anyone hasn't heard this, we do record these calls and I have access to all of them, but I'm not planning on posting them online anywhere. So if you or a colleague happen to miss a call and you'd like a recording, please just reach out to me. I'm happy to share it with you, but please keep it internal to your organization. So today, our topic of discussion, we're going to hand things over to the good folks in Alaska. We've got Jimmy Ord with us, who's going to be doing a presentation with their experiences doing residential energy efficiency programs in the past. So Jimmy, please take it away.
Thanks, Maddie. I'm assuming everyone can hear me okay? All right, yes. Excellent. You'll notice my background is definitely not in Alaska right now. Definitely have an affinity to places outside of Alaska. So like warmer places, but also do like Alaska. Anyway, enough about me. So today we want to share with you an experience we had that started in 2008 and lasted for about 10 years. And it was a very good experience in terms of the benefits that it had for Alaska and residents and our ability to improve the housing in our state. And it was quite successful. There were things we did right and there were things we did wrong. So when we first heard that there was money coming down the pike from the federal government for a home energy rebate program, we kind of got very curious and excited because we had such a good experience with our previous program that we thought, hey, here's another opportunity to improve the housing in Alaska. This program that is coming looks to be somewhat different and structured different than we have structured our program, but there are similarities that you'll see and I'll point out. And there's also a couple of elements that we're hoping don't get too restrictive, that we are allowed to have the sort of the freedom and the flexibility to administer and run our program that is going to make it accessible for everyone in our state, because we are such a large state. And there's many parts that do not have access to a road. They can't drive to a main urban center. They have to get on an airplane or get on a boat and then get on an airplane. So it's quite remote geographically. Now, granted, yes, we do have big cities and the vast majority of people live in an urban center, but we don't want to leave everybody behind. We want to make sure that this rising tide raises all of our boats. I also had my colleague on the call, Ethan Stoops, and Mike Spencer. I think that's the team from AHFC. And just let you guys know, Mike and Ethan, I may pull on you for a question or ask you to answer a question if I can't fill it in. So without any further ado, I tried to make this short, but I hopefully don't make it too long. So if we're running up on time, just let me know. I could speed up and we could rock and roll with this thing. I'm going to share my screen, have a little presentation put together. So I'm hoping you guys can share my screen. Just maybe Maddie, if you Can, just shake your head. All right,
Looks good.
All right, rock and roll here. So 2008 was an interesting time for the United States. We were going through somewhat of a housing crunch and a mortgage crisis. And at the same time, the price of a barrel of oil was near $150. And that was good and bad for Alaska. It was bad because a vast majority of our state heats their home with fuel oil. And that means high energy costs are going to mean very expensive bills. And you know, it's not something that anyone wants to do when they have to spend $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 a year on home heating fuel. So the state, on the good side, was receiving a lot of income from the oil and gas taxes, because the higher the price of a barrel of oil at the time, the way they structured the taxes meant more money came into the state for state revenue. So the legislature decided, let's take some of this revenue and provide relief to the residents through the home energy rebate program, which is what led us to one of the biggest programs the state ever saw in terms of an investment in housing and making sure that houses are more energy efficient. So what size scale are we talking? Well, about $242 million was invested in the rebate program over the course of 10 years. Initially, it started with 100 million, and then over the subsequent years, they kept putting more and more money into it. And then as the price of oil went down and down and down, so did the funding for the program. But then also, you know, the need never went totally away, but it wasn't at the crisis level that it was. Nearly 26,000 homes participated in the program and received a rebate. That's about 15% of the eligible housing stock, or the eligible homeowners that could participate in the program received a rebate, and nearly 40,000 homes received reimbursement for an initial energy rating, initial assessment of the home. There's some other benefits that came with the job. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, as there's a lot of content this morning or this afternoon. A couple more impacts. The average savings was about 34%, and that varied depending on you know, your community and the cost of energy and some other factors. So how did it work? Homeowners were eligible, renters were not, businesses were not. So you really only had to be, not only, but you had to be the homeowner, and you had to live in Alaska and be a resident. Other than that, there really was no restriction in terms of participation. There's no income requirement. Anybody could participate in the program. Then if you want to participate, you got to sign up and get in the queue. Times the wait was more than a year because of the high demand, especially early in the program, 2009, 2010. Once you kind of got in the queue and got on board, you selected an energy rater, we call them. Some people call them an energy auditor. It's called energy rater here. And they had to you know, choose the energy rater that was going to come out to the home and do that initial assessment based on an approved list of approved energy raters that our organization had sort of pre-qualified. Once that energy rating was done, you know, they evaluated the performance of the home. It gave it a mark, gave it a score. In Alaska, we have a star scale. So it's 1 star is the least efficient home and a 6 star is the most efficient home. That star level goes on a point scale. So it's a 1 star is, you know, somewhere in the range of a 0 to 40 points. And let's say a 6 star at the highest end might be a, you know, 92 to 100 points or something. So the stars equate to a point system, 0 to 100. Once that initial energy rating was done and the assessment of the home was determined, then the homeowner submitted their paperwork to our organization, and we went through, determined eligibility, applicability, et cetera, and reimbursed for that initial energy rating, which was at the time around $325. Then the homeowner was the project manager, and that's where some of the programs that I've seen over the years differ from Alaska's program. It really was the homeowner driving the bus. They chose the contractor, they chose to do the work themselves, they made the improvements, and they had a time period of around 18 months to do that. After they were done making all the improvements that they needed to or wanted to, then they contacted that energy rater again. Energy rater came out, did a post-assessment. Assessment came back, all the paperwork went back to our organization with the receipts that the homeowner had spent on the different improvements, whether it was a contractor bill or purchases they made that were eligible, purchasing supplies, caulking, insulation, et cetera, and then we determined their rebate, and the rebate was determined by the number of steps they went up. Remember I said every home falls on a step scale. So for example, if a home went from a 2-star up to a 4-star, they would get a certain amount of rebate, and we had all of that worked out in the background, and it was pretty evident how much of a rebate you would get as you were going through the process. The certificate was pretty self-explanatory. There were 3 components to it. You had the main part, which gave the star level of the home and the point score. That was kind of just the standard certificate. The next part of it was an energy cost and features report that outlined some of the diagnostics that were determined from that initial energy rating, what the blower door test came back at, what the insulation was of the attic or crawl space, window U value, those type of things were all detailed in the energy cost and features report, air tightness of the home, et cetera, et cetera. And the third piece of the energy rating package was probably the most important to the homeowner. And I know it's kind of hard to read, but each homeowner received an improvement options report. And on that report, it detailed specifically what measures were going to give them a number of points, right? So let's say a home started at a 50-point energy rating, and they knew if they wanted to get the full $10,000 rebate, they would have to go up to 70 points. Well, they could look at the improvement options report and kind of like a menu, they would pick which improvements that they wanted to do in terms of their budget, in terms of their capacity resources, to be able to get more points, to be able to go up to that next step or to get the maximum amount of rebate. So each improvement, for example, the first one is, fill this cavity, maybe it was the exposed floor, garage floor cavity with R38 blown in dense pack insulation, right? So if you did that measure, and I'm just pulling this as an example, you would get 4.6 points, and that would get added to your initial cost basis, and you would kind of work your way up to get a higher rebate. So 18 months to do that, and that for the most part went pretty well. A couple of the challenges we had in Alaska: a lot of communities are not accessed by the road system. So how do you get contractors, supplies, materials, even the initial energy rating? How was that done? How do we come up, how do we get an energy rater out to some of these rural communities? Because the cost of sending an energy rater out there was really prohibitive, and didn't make sense, because the initial cost of getting an energy rater out there was just kind of didn't really work if you wanted to participate in the program, because there's not going to be any energy savings because you spend all the money to get the energy rater out there. We did create a program where if multiple participants in a certain community were all interested in getting that initial energy rating, we would subsidize the cost of that energy rater to go out to those communities to allow them to participate at a reduced cost. So one of the other things that we had learned was the contractors, and the folks that worked around the program, not in the program, but on the periphery, they wanted us to be the enforcer or the intermediary, and we really just tried to keep our relationship between us and the homeowner. And since the homeowner was the director of their project, then they were they kind of had to deal with their contractor or their accountant or whoever it was they were having to do the work, or if there were any issues that came up. Some of the other challenges were, again, if a homeowner did the work, how was that quality of that work determined? Who verified that it was done up to a standard? Because when that energy rater came back the second time, they were looking at, was the insulation installed? Was a new heating system put in? What was the new blower door numbers? And running the diagnostics to come up with a determination for that final score. They weren't necessarily looking at, was the caulk around the window done in an appropriate manner, right? They were looking to see if the caulk was done, but not necessarily, oh, well, it looks like maybe somebody put caulk in a couple corners and that was it, right? It's not necessarily the quality of the work. So that definitely was a program challenge. that we worked on in a variety of ways, some through education, and some through technical assistance, direct consultation. The other thing was, in the beginning, it was a challenge, was earned media. Essentially just the word got out, this program was coming, and we were inundated tremendously with demand. Really kind of put us behind the 8 ball and from the get-go. And that's some of the lessons learned I wanted to share with you today, is what, now knowing we have more funding coming for another program, what we're going to do in advance to make sure we set ourselves up for success. I only have about 3 more slides, so we're rolling pretty well. So some of the unintended consequences: the prices of goods and materials for boilers, heating systems, water heaters, insulation. As soon as the word got out there was a rebate for some of this, the prices went through a roof. If it would cost $7,000 to put heating system in Anchorage, Alaska in 2007, well, it cost $10,000 to $12,000 to $14,000 in 2011. Significant cost increases, because obviously suppliers knew that homeowners were getting rebated, so that they knew there was demand and the prices of those goods and services could go up. So that was maybe it was unintended, or maybe it was undesired, but it was definitely, we figured it would happen, but maybe not to the degree that it did. In our case, since it was a state-funded program entirely, there were tax implications for the participants, and we pretty much just left that up to the homeowner to work out with their accountant. This is a different scenario with the funding that's coming from DOE, but our program had tax implications. In terms of the energy raters that we had trained and brought up to speed, and that were sort of part of the program, we had an agreement with all authorized energy raters. We definitely had our bad apples. We had, most of them were good. Don't get me wrong. We had very many energy raters, and most of them were good. However, we definitely had to have good quality control, because some energy raters took advantage and would do what we call drive-by energy ratings, or they would spend hardly any time in the home, if at all, and send the report and collect their paycheck. The other thing related to that is fraud was very real. Many bad actors tried to take advantage of the program. So we had to ensure that we were on the lookout for that. And we put our double checks and triple checks in place to ensure that nobody was taking advantage of the program. Lessons learned: really needed to establish solid guidelines and rules before hitting the go live button with the program. We got behind the 8 ball because legislature said, here's $100 million. We want this on the street in the next month or 2. And it was drinking from the fire hose, that first bit. So in hindsight, this one, we know we have time coming. So this is great that we're having these conversations and we're all communicating with each other and we're learning from each other. But establishing the policies and procedures before we go live and figuring out most of what we can figure out in advance is really going to set ourselves up for success. Now, the flip side of that is your guidelines should, at least in my mind, and most of our minds here at our organization, should be guidelines, because we want to remember the participants and those who are going through the program and what's in the best interest for them, right? I mean, we're trying to improve the home's resiliency, its energy efficiency, ensure the home is more comfortable and safe, right? So at the end of the day, if someone fell a little bit outside of the guideline, it's going to be a hard no. We're going to cut them off and say, no, you can't get a rebate. No, we always kept the customer, the consumer, the participant in mind to ensure that they took full advantage of the program. And we wrote our guidelines in a way that allowed us the flexibility to do so. Something else that was crucial was we had one point of contact in the beginning. Anybody could call an energy rater and get an energy rating and submit paperwork to us. We had no idea what was coming in the door. Well, after a couple of months, we realized that was not going to work. And I know there's other programs out there that figured all this stuff out. And these are just some of the lessons that we learned from a program, 15 years ago now. So we have had a centralized call center where everybody that wanted to participate in the program had to go through this one direct place, right? Where it's one website, and we had a team of people dealing with everybody income. So everything got funneled through that call center. And then that allowed us to watch the program as it went on. And it's my last bullet there. Maybe I'll just jump to that last bullet is, we watched the encumbrances of the program like a hawk. For example, if we had $100 million and we had 30,000 people participate in the program, well, how many of those people were going to actually finish the program? How many were going to get the full rebate? How many were just going to participate and get the initial as is energy rating, that first energy rating? So we until we got into the program, we see some of those metrics where it's like, okay, the average participant gets a $7,000 rebate. 30% of the people sign up and just get the energy rating. 60% of the people go through and finish the program. Those kind of metrics. So we ensured that we weren't over encumbering ourselves, and we didn't ever want to be in a position to run out of money while people were still in the program. So we watched those numbers like a hawk, and we really couldn't do that until we set up the procedures on the front end with the policies and guidelines and ensure everybody was coming through the door through that one funnel of the call center. And obviously the tracking of all of this data with the database, tracking the rebates, the reports, on the back end, and that got better with time. But making sure that you have the ability to track those metrics, and just starting off with an Excel spreadsheet is not going to work. You need something a little bit more robust and dynamic to be able to track a program of this size. And then the last bullet, which is in the middle of the slide, is the education piece and component. Since we didn't require participants to get an approved contractor, sort of select a contractor that was part of the program, we allowed the participants to do the work themselves or hire a contractor that they chose. They were pretty much the general contractor for the project. We provided a vast amount of training. We had classes every week on the process. We had classes in the major cities. We had hours and hours of training on insulation, air sealing, heating and hot water systems, best practices, lighting and appliances, all of the components that went into retrofitting a home. We had training and classes for it, so that we're not only educating the homeowners, but we're educating realtors, contractors, appraisers, and others in the industry. So it was a pretty successful program. Again, some of the things I wanted to touch on as we wrap up here were contractors were independent of the program, right? So we had to train them separately. We did not have a direct relationship with them. We did have a direct relationship with the energy raters. They were on the hook. They had an agreement with us. So we had quality control of them, but there was no quality control of the contractors or of the homeowners doing the work on the actual home. And the other point was the rural component. How do we ensure that this program is accessible to everyone throughout the state, whether they live in a small Southeast Alaska community that's only accessible by boat, or it's a rural community accessible by plane, or it's an urban area, just like you would be in Portland or Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So that's kind of the general overview of the program I wanted to throw at you guys. I just looked at the chat. It looks like there's a whole bunch of, or a couple things in the chat, not a whole bunch, a couple things in the chat. Ethan or Mike, did you have anything you wanted to add? And if not, Maddie, I'll kick it back to you. If there's any Q&A, we can go there.
I saw Michael turning his camera on, so maybe there's something that you wanted to jump in on.
No, I didn't have anything. I was just getting ready in case there was some.
Gotcha. We did get a question in the chat. I think most of the notifications you're seeing are people introducing yourself. But I will go over what we do have in the chat, and then if people want to add to the chat or just raise your hand or turn on your camera so that I know to call on you. So the first question in the chat was from Brian in Montana, and he's asking, was there an existing workforce available for energy raters, or did you need to grow that workforce?
Yeah, good question. So Alaska Housing Finance Corporation already had a network of energy raters, but it was very small, and they were doing energy ratings for other purposes. Just real quick, the background. Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, we are the state's finance corporation, so we invest in mortgages, just like national level Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. And in order to invest in a home, sorry, I've got a notification distracted me. We have to ensure that home meets an energy standard, and by doing that, we need to evaluate it with energy raters. So we had a small network of energy raters that evaluated a home's energy performance, but that was not nearly enough. So we did have a major ramp up in training in the very early days of the program, where we went from 20 to 30 energy raters all the way up to 150 energy raters. So yes, we did have a small network, but no, it was not enough to handle the demand.
Yeah. And then I think you pretty much answered this already, but someone was asking in the chat for the specifics of the numbers, but you said up to 150 were needed. A question while we're on this topic, I was curious if you could speak to your experience managing that network of raters, I think is what you call them, the folks that were actually going out and doing the evaluation of their houses, because I think that'll be something for all the state energy offices. They'll be needing to decide what they want their interaction to look like for contractors and maybe for, you know, their version of quality assurance.
Mike Spencer, would you have any thoughts on that? Since you were an energy rater and were more involved in those nuances, do you have any thoughts before I jump in?
So we did have a quality control process. We try to be proactive and we had trainings and updated education. We were following the BPI standard at that time. So we had a set of standards that we were following, continuing education that was required for them. And we try to do annual visits with them on site to follow them as they did a rating. And we also did desk rating reviews. In other words, an audit would come in and we would periodically take a few from their sample and do an audit on them to make sure that they were following the procedures established. And then if we had communications from a homeowner or questions about the ratings, that might also trigger out a quality control visit, but depending on what the concern was depending on how deep we had to go.
Yeah, and that's on the energy rater side. And again, we didn't have any oversight of the contractors or the homeowners doing the work. And we didn't see a way that would be successful for our program and for the geography of our state and for participants to maximize their ability to participate in this program. It just didn't seem advantageous to us to require participants to have a contractor come out, because it was already difficult enough getting energy raters out to some of the places. So I couldn't imagine having an authorized contractor come out and do the work. It'd just be so cost prohibitive. So that's one of the things that we're hoping that as this new program comes down the pike, that will still, it may not look like the old program, but we don't want to lose that flexibility to create a program that is going to fit and work for our unique state.
I'm going to take a moderator's prerogative to ask you a follow-up question, which is in the homeowner education component, did you provide any information about what to look for in a contractor, or you just left it totally up to the homeowners?
Absolutely. We had a whole class dedicated, it was called How to Choose a Contractor. And so we tried to empower the homeowner and the participant with all of the resources and tools they needed to participate successfully in the program.
Yeah, great. David Heslem, was there something you wanted to add on the rater or contractor training angle?
Yeah, I wanted to just follow up around the concept of the initial ratings and the follow through with the work. And you mentioned, I don't know if it was actual numbers or just off the cuff, Jimmy, but you said 30% might have only got the initial rating and 60% went through with that. But do you know like what those numbers were for the program? I mean, the incentives were pretty rich, so you would think the follow through numbers would be pretty high. But
Yeah.
I think folks would be interested in knowing with that type of requirement.
Yeah, and maybe that's something I should have refreshed in the memory bank before I went into this call. It was something where, I mean, like you look at it where it's like it was a pipeline, right? And at every step in the process, there was a certain percentage of people that dropped off the pipeline. At the end of the day, though, it was some of their neighborhood of 60% of the people who signed up for the program wind up getting a rebate, which is pretty high, honestly.
That's very, I mean, from knowing about how all the different residential RF funded programs worked from back in that time period, that's a very high rate of people completing something and getting an incentive.
Yeah, that's the only number I remember is it was in the 60%. It could have been even high. It was like 65% of participants actually got a rebate, which was pretty high. And then the average rebate again was around $7,000. The average investment, all told, between what the rebate was and the homeowner put in was between $10,000 and $12,000. That's pretty significant.
Yeah, and I ran the numbers quickly about how many households there are in Alaska. So it looks like, about 7% of all the households in Alaska got improved through your program, which is amazing as well. So
yeah,
give people a relative sense of how many homes.
And if you do those numbers, it's eligible. So because you had to be owner occupied, right? So of the owner occupied homes, it was, I think it's like 15%. And then if you layer in, because we run the low income weatherization program as well. And at that same time, the state funded that program quite immensely. So we wound up being able to weatherize more than 20% of the houses in Alaska in those 10 years, which is huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, David. I'll get back to a couple questions in the chat. The next one that we have is if you were able to find a solution to combat contractors raising their prices when the new incentives came down, if you had the opportunity to redesign your program, would you do anything differently to try to address that?
Personally, and maybe Mike and Ethan have a different side of this. I think that's the way. I mean, you have to know it, right? You have to be cognizant of that. That's what's going to happen. But it's the nature of the beast. It's supply and demand is the way I see it, and you're not going to stop it. And I really don't even know the best ways to mitigate it. Maybe somebody else has a way that they mitigated it, but we did not. We just recognized it and informed people and gave them the tools and resources, told them to get 3 quotes, make sure you shop around, but we didn't do anything to try and curtail that.
Yeah. The next question in the chat, indicating that it wasn't income qualified, but they're curious if you tracked income at all for any like a comparison or research purposes.
No, I don't recall us tracking income at all.
Okay.
But obviously on the flip side with our weatherization program, obviously income's tracked heavily in that program. So in some ways we tracked it where a participant couldn't participate in both those programs, right? They couldn't qualify under low income weatherization and then also participate in the rebate program.
The next question is if you have any recommendations on successfully building out the radar network. Did you work with schools, trade organizations, something like that?
We already had a strong relationship with the home building industry. We have what was called the Cold Climate Housing Research Center here in Alaska, which is now attached to become part of a National Renewable Energy Lab up in Fairbanks, Alaska. So between the home building network, the universities, and our research center, we already had a pretty much strong network. So it wasn't too difficult to get people to want to participate. And in all honesty, with that type of funding, there was demand. People are entrepreneurs and they saw the opportunity. So they definitely jumped on the boat.
Yeah. I'm curious if maybe we can pivot a little bit just to, if you have any additional thoughts or ideas about best practices as regarding remote or rural communities. You mentioned sort of like pooling interests and being able to subsidize travel to get to those locations, but does anything else come to mind as something other states should consider in order to build those metaphorical bridges?
Well, a couple thoughts going through my mind. We've come a long way with technology in the last couple of years. A lot more people are comfortable with doing things virtually, trainings virtually, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not saying this would be a good thing. I think there's inherent problems with it, but is there an opportunity to do some kind of assessment virtually? I don't know, but it should be looked at and discussed. And in terms of allowing participants in rural communities that don't have access to those of their urban residents do, it's just ensuring that you don't leave them out. Like every decision that you make with regard to the program, ensuring who is impacting and that how is this going to affect those out in rural Alaska or some other part of the state, because it's just so important that, those are the people that you're trying to help, right? So how do they take advantage of the program?
Yeah, it sounds like you haven't gotten to the stage of assessing whether like remote audits would be feasible or not for you guys, but that was going to be my follow-up question, is if you were interested or looking into those kinds of virtual remote technology options.
Yeah, so it's definitely something that has to be part of the conversation. Biggest concern is, let's say a homeowner, they decide to make a bunch of energy efficiency improvements on the home and they do a bang up job, and there's no diagnostic testing that is done post improvements that ensures the home is in a safe condition, right? That there's adequate airflow, ventilation, combustion safety is where it should be. Those tests come back and they come back, in a good way, right? And that's the hard part with remote testing, is how do we ensure that those elements are factored in?
Yeah. We have a question in the chat. Did you have to address homeowner complaints based on work not meeting intended outcomes, or whether or not the rater during the test that would fail the project?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a whole committee. I had a whole little division, a group of people that were involved in handling homeowner complaints and overseeing all of that. We met weekly, to review all the cases that came in. I remember time sitting in on that meeting, and just you would hear the different cases that popped up, and whether it was a homeowner complaining about their contractor, or it was they missed the 18-month window or whatever it was. And that's something I tried to allude to in my presentation. So we created the guidelines in a way that allowed us the flexibility to err in the side of the homeowner and the participant, because at the end of the day, what are we trying to do? We're trying to help improve that, improve the energy efficiency of the home that they live in, so that their home is more safe, comfortable, energy efficient, et cetera. So we had the policy and procedure in place, but we had the ability to help the homeowner if they fell outside of that policy.
Yeah, do you have any particular examples when you think of that flexibility that states could think about when they're writing their own guidelines, or even at a higher level, if there's something that NASEO or the states should ask DOE to allow?
Well, the only thing that's coming to mind is for example, we, in the policy is like an extension, right? So the homeowner at 18 months, and I can't tell you how many times people come in and they turn in their paperwork late, or they request that post energy rating past the deadline, and they turn all their stuff in. So they've spent the money, they made the home more energy efficient, but they missed the deadline by 3 days or even a month. So we didn't have it in our policy that was written so hard that said, 18 months are up, you're out the door, right? We always allowed the opportunity for folks to come back in, even if they missed the deadline, and take advantage of the program. Because they already went through it, they already put the investment in, and the home was made energy efficient, but they missed the deadline. That to us did seem nonsensical. So we didn't write it in a way that was so firm that we couldn't allow those people to come in and get the rebate, even if they missed the deadline.
Yeah. We have a question in the chat. Actually, if I scroll up a little bit, and Claudia, if I can put you on the spot, maybe to clarify a little bit of your question, you're asking about what tech stack was used.
Thank you, Maddie. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Very good presentation. Thank you. Thank you. The tech stack refers to the technology that you have utilized. And usually it's not only one piece, it's a group of technologies that you connected and you made it work. So for example, on the report that you gave out to the homeowners, did you use Snug Pro or something similar, or you developed your own? And this is a few years back, over a decade ago, so I recognize that as well. So any insight on that would be appreciated. Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, Maddie.
Very good question, Claudia, and this probably helped provide context around this. Since Alaska Housing Finance Corporation had already been involved in we call it the home energy rating system. We already had a system in place to evaluate a home's energy performance. So we already had the energy rating, the energy modeling software that's developed specifically for Alaska. We already had the small network of energy raters. So that rating certificate was already there. It was already an output from the energy modeling software. We already had that infrastructure in place. What we didn't have was the database that collected all of that data. And that was something that was developed as the program got going, was the back end data from those energy ratings was now stored in a database. That database was initially with a third-party contractor, and then over the years morphed under our organization, and our IT department kind of became the umbrella that oversaw it. We still work with that contractor, but it definitely was not theirs, not our corporation's, not in their oversight at first, right? It was the contractor did it. The actual tracking of the program that was created in-house by our IT department. So every time someone came through the program, we punch those credentials numbers into our database and we keep track of it that way. But that was not the case in the early days. It was a spreadsheet. I mean, I kid you not, it was somebody would call in, they would log their information in an Excel spreadsheet, and they would keep track of everything that way. Over time, we realized that there was just so many limitations with that. So we created what we call the ERP, Energy Rebate Program database, the ERP database, which tied to the database that is the one the energy ratings when they were done, all of the data points about the house, and that that would tie to those two databases. Sorry, I'm not making very much sense here, but yes, at one time, everything did not talk to each other and things were not in place. At the end of the program, systems were in place where different databases were talking to each other, and we had everything automated, and most of it was done in-house.
What I think might be the last question in the chat is asking if this program met your financial goals. Did you have any financial goals related with this program?
The program was funded by the legislature. And, from our perspective, we were the entity that delivered the program, managed it successfully, and took that intent, channeled it through our organization, delivered it to the public so that they could improve the energy efficiency of their housing. And, from our standpoint, that was what success was, right? We did a good job of administering the program and trying to reduce the bureaucracy, reduce the amount of burden that was, and the complexity of it. So, our financial goal really was a limited amount of administration cost. I mean, we had less than 3% admin costs to administer this program. So, for every, right? I mean, for every, what was that? I'm not gonna do the math, I'm bad at math. So we hardly took any funding to run the program. We tried to funnel as much as we could out to the homes to improve their energy efficiency and out to the networks. So that would probably be the biggest financial goal or thing we were trying to achieve.
Claudia, I noticed you turned your camera on. Was there anything you wanted to add?
Oh, I was just interested to know how much back then, if he has a sense of how much it cost them to build this database and connect everything. No, yeah, I didn't think so. It's been too long. So thank you.
Yeah, and it was
Thanks,
an
Maddie.
evolution over years.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
We did get a question in the chat if you had partners that participated in the rural remote areas to get community participation.
We did. That's a good question. In the early part of the program, we had was called the portal, and that was in our second largest city in Fairbanks, Alaska, and that was like the local resource for people who are interested in the program, could go to that place or communicate with that place. Part of the hang up there was they didn't have as tight of a connection to us as we should have. I think that's a great solution, but you have to ensure that those portals, those satellite locations, I think this is what you're getting at, they need to be part of the bigger picture. They need to be in communication. They need to be on contract. They need to be, like part of the group administering the program. In our case, the portal that we had set up in Fairbanks, that was through an existing relationship. And most of the time they would just take the call, take the inquiry and funnel it back to us to answer, right? So we didn't set them up for the success to be able to answer and deal with the things on their own because they weren't part of the core program administration. But I think that model would work very well if you had different places and different people who were part of the program administration that were clued into the sort of the central hub.
Thanks for that. And folks, please feel free to continue to add questions in the chat, but oh, and one just popped up right now. How many staff did you need at the state level for administration?
One of the things we tried to do was limit the amount of permanent staff. So we honestly, we only really had, a handful, less than 10 permanent staff that were hired. Everybody else was project-based, or we hire a temporary services company on a contractual basis, where we'd have what we call temps, and they would come in and do a lot of the processing, because we didn't want to increase. Again, our metrics were to keep costs low, get the program dollars out on the street. So anything we could do where it was a non-permanent basis was good for us. So we only had a handful of staff come on permanently. And I am lucky enough to be one of those permanent staff that came on and got to stick around.
And there was a question, is the 10-ish people, do you know if they were all full-time?
Yeah. And again, that number is, it's arbitrary because it could have been 10 at one time, but maybe most of the time was 4 or 5. It just depended on the year, how much funding we had at that time. We're talking early program, late program.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely. And that's one thing. So peeling back a layer real quick, we are like the biggest thing that we are trying to focus on with regard to all of the money, whether it's through this rebate program or some of the other things that we're looking at, is staffing. Ensuring we are in a place to accept and receive whatever is coming. We don't be caught flat-footed. So having staff who are dedicated to managing and running these programs in place before these programs come is something that we are keenly watching and want to make sure that we're up and running before we need to be up and running.
Yeah, and maybe Ethan, you've got your camera on if you wanted to jump in with anything.
Yeah, Jimmy, I was just one of the things I think might be helpful for everybody is to talk a little bit about how sort of after the initial wave, and in concern with, maybe the previous program before that had gotten overextended, pulling back and only letting, 100 ratings a week or 100 entries a week, just so we can make sure that, every time someone came into the program, they were funded and they were tracked. I just wonder if that might be beneficial to people.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ethan. And again, in the early days, it was anybody could grab an energy rater and turn in their application, and we had no idea what was coming in. We initiated the call center, initiated that funnel, and then once people came into the funnel and they got in the queue, then we would enroll folks in the program. Like once you signed up, didn't mean that you're in the program. You had to be, your name had to come to the top of the roll in order to get released and be able to participate in the program. And that way we controlled the encumbrances of the funding, and we weren't overextending ourselves, and we could track things through the program. So I would just caution people to there's a lot of time for the funding to be rolled out. So it doesn't all have to happen right away, right? There's time that we can put the policies and procedures in place, get everyone trained up. And then even when that is the go live time, it doesn't have to be, people could sign up, but everyone doesn't have to go through it all at once, because if everybody's out there and you don't have the network to be able to do all the work at the same time, there's going to be a lot of frustration from participants. Well, I can't find a contractor, can't call an energy rater, they're too busy, they're scheduled 6 months out. But if they know that they're not technically released off the Rolodex yet, then it kind of tempers expectations.
Perna, I see you've got your hand raised. We can go to you next.
Thank you, Maddie. And thank you, Jimmy, for this excellent presentation. Really great to hear the insights from this really important program. And clearly it was very successful. One question I had for you was, what are the lessons learned about consumer education? Did you all have anyone focused on marketing and communications? I know you had in your slides that earned media was a success. Any further details you could provide on that would be quite useful, please.
Yeah. So on the earned media, that the majority of it in the very beginning was earned media. And then kind of when that wave died off, Alaska has the benefit of having what's called the permanent fund dividend. Every resident receives a dividend, which is part of the proceeds from the taxes on the oil and gas. And that means we have a database of nearly everybody in Alaska, because everybody gets a check every year. So we use that Rolodex to send out not an email, it was a direct mail piece to let them know about the program, that if they wanted to participate in the program, that it was out there. So we did a direct mail piece in the very beginning. But honestly, other than that, it was word of mouth, it was earned media, because with a program of this size and this funding, it was just so popular that we had to keep people away, right? That wasn't a problem we focused on. Toward the end of the program, we wanted to make sure that folks knew it was wrapping up and closing. So we did do another blast toward the end to let everyone know that, hey, this is your last chance, it's closing on this date, blah, blah, blah. So at the end of the program, we did some outreach around that. To your question about education, we worked both in-house and with contractors to do the education for homeowners and contractors and the other network of people that were immersed in the program. Like I said, there was online presence, there was in-person presence, and it was weekly. For example, here in Anchorage, which is about 300,000 people, there's 700,000 people in Alaska, 300,000 people live in Anchorage, and that probably extends to 400 to 450,000 within an hour of Anchorage. So the vast majority of people live in this area. We held classes, consumer classes, every night from 7 to 9 p.m., 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday. And there was 8 classes, and every night was a different class. And it was like clockwork. So Monday night was, welcome to the program. Tuesday night was insulation. Thursday night was heating and hot water, right? And next Friday or next Thursday was how to choose a contractor. And those were in-person classes. They were a little bit hands-on, but it was great because they could get hooked up with others who were going through the program. People could get their questions answered. Contractors could, we allowed contractors to go and present. So contractors that were, doing the work for the homeowners in the program would go to those classes. And, again, we didn't want, yes, they were there and they were looking for business, but they were also educating, right? So we kind of walked that balance between education and, them soliciting business, but it was a great way, right? Because we didn't only let certain contractors go, we let any contractor go and present if they wanted to and talk to the class and provide information. And then we would do stuff in-house. where we would run trainings and classes that were done by in-house staff at our offices. So yeah, that was kind of some of the education and training that we did. I don't know, did I answer that a manner that answer your question?
That was very helpful. Yes, you addressed my question very well. Thank you so much.
We had another question come in for you, Jimmy, in the chat. Can you talk more about how you handle the variation in demand during the course of the program and how you handle the wrap up of the program? In Massachusetts, they found some clusters of participants due to word of mouth. And did you have any concerns with different degrees of program participation based on geography in Alaska?
Yes. I'm not going to remember all that, so just help me out here. So the
first
part, the first part.
The first part was, how did you handle the variation in demand over the course of the program?
Yeah, again, that one was, I can't stress it enough, having that centralized location. And when I say location, I mean, point of contact, where if somebody wanted to participate in Alaska's rebate program, they went to akrebate.com. Now, that site's still live, but don't go there because it's not updated in a while. So like, that's where they went. And then there was the phone number, there was the, they could log in, they could sign up, they could do their thing. And then from there, we just managed the program and the rollout of people that we would sort of dispatch. That's what we call it. We would dispatch folks into the program from that queue. They'd sign up on the queue. And then every week we would, like Ethan said, we would dispatch 100 names into the program. And then those 100 names, they would get the green light to go contact their energy rater and schedule the energy rating. So we sort of controlled the flow going into the program. In the beginning, it was painful because some people were waiting for more than a year to get dispatched. And that was painful, I ain't gonna lie. But there was no other way to do it because we didn't want to overextend ourselves. Mm-hmm. Toward the end of the program, when we wanted to wrap things up, yes, we did some communication in terms of letting folks know. We really tried hard to reach out to the rural communities to ensure that they knew the program was ending and they had one last chance. In all honesty, we didn't spend too much time worrying about urban folks because they had 10 years, and if they missed the boat, then they had an easy path forward to participate. And we said that, so in some ways, we let people know the end of the program was coming, but the catch there was we didn't want to create a bigger demand toward the end of the program and then have everybody go, oh, hey, the rebate program, and then create more of an interest than we had funding for. So we did targeted outreach at the end of the program to let folks know it was closing. It was more done in the rural areas and remote folks to make sure they had every opportunity to participate. Less so in the urban areas because it felt like they had already participated, because we didn't want to create that expectation of people wanting to participate and then us not having the funding. So in many cases, the program just kind of went quietly into the night.
The second, oh, go ahead, Michael, sorry.
One of the other things, Jimmy, that could benefit people is the fact that on our rural locations, we required that there be 5, homes there in those communities that needed to be rated. And so if somebody got on the list and we told them, hey, we need 5 in your community, they would hustle and find 5 people in that community that also needed it, so that we were able to serve them and get their ratings done and get them along that process a lot quicker. So word of mouth, even in the rural, was very high.
Mm-hmm.
And so the second part of that question is if you had concerns with different degrees of program participation based on geography, and you kind of addressed that just now, but if there's anything you want to add, feel free.
Yeah, the way we looked at it was, since we ran the low-income weatherization program and this rebate program that did not have income requirements, in many cases, we kind of were hitting both ends of the spectrum. So it seemed if participation in the rebate program was low, it was like there was a higher participation in the weatherization program in that area. But there was definitely a donut hole. We recognized it. There was the folks that, they didn't qualify for weatherization, but they didn't have the resources to participate in the rebate program. We called them the donut hole. And we tried to target them and, reduce the burdens for participation through whether it was financing or education, training, whatever. But in terms of, some areas participating more than others, like Mike said, a lot of it came down to, is there a local champion? Is there a local group that is really pushing the program and out there banging the doors? And in some cases, that came from the energy rater or the contractor. Yeah, I remember we have these things in Alaska, sorry, they're elsewhere, but they're called home shows. And it's just centralized, it happens every spring and put on by the Builder Association. And there's hundreds of vendors that go to the one place and everybody's showing off their services, their kitchen cabinets, their whatever, everything related to a home, right? And energy raters and contractors would be at those home shows flagging people down. They would be, hey, have you heard about the Alaska Home Energy Rebate Program? So a lot of participation in the way we saw it was dependent on how much of the local champion, how much were people who realized there was an opportunity there to make some money, and how hard they pushed in those communities.
I want to recognize we are officially over time, so I want to be respectful of people's calendars if you need to jump. But Jimmy, if you can stay on for a couple minutes more, we had such a good question that I would love to wrap up with, which is, do you think there is any lasting positive impacts on the contractor network or homeowner awareness of energy efficiency?
Yes. It's hard though, because Alaska is such a transient state. I mean, we have a core that sticks around, but there's so many people in Alaska that come in and leave. I mean, our population just keeps shrinking every year. So we have net migration, I think it's called, or net out migration, it doesn't matter. So struggling with that one. Like, as much as I want to say yes, the contractor network has remained strong, and that people know how to build energy efficient housing and how to do the repairs. Without the stimulus and without that ongoing catalyst, it waned. It's from what I see, and Spencer or Mike Spencer or Ethan, if you see otherwise, like it's not like it went away, but it's certainly not as strong as it was, because you have a new crop of people coming in, you have folks in the industry who've retired, and new folks that they got to learn all the tricks of the trade, and there's just not the incentive to have folks like get up to speed and be knowledgeable about what it takes.
So yeah, with that, I agree. The contractors, their network has kind of stayed the same, because we were really in the education portion for the contractors. But as far as the homeowners and those that would actually use the knowledge, we've kept those courses going. And we've done throughout the years, as we go to different communities, we try to offer these courses or some kind of tidbit of information regarding how you can make your home energy efficient or healthier, indoor air quality. All of these concerns still exist. We just don't have the volume for them coming into us. So as we can, when we go to a community, we try to address those in whatever meetings we can gather.
That's a great point, Mike. I'm glad you brought that up. I would say that any homeowner that participated in this program absolutely is better off today than they were before going through the program. They know how the home works. They understand house as a system. They're more cognizant of, when things aren't right in the house. I mean, just was it yesterday or the day before, we saw something about some entity wanting to ban indoor gas stoves for cooking. Yes, it's an issue when you see a lot of houses not have ventilation over their gas stoves. But when a homeowner went through the rebate program and they got educated by those classes, by the energy rater, and they managed the project themselves, I guarantee you that they know better. They know to run their range hood when they cook on their gas stove. They know what it means to have a more energy efficient home. They know the benefits of the program. So, I mean, in terms of lasting benefits, that one is huge. Is any homeowner that went through this program and was brought up to speed and went through the program and project, they are much better off in terms of being a knowledgeable homeowner than they were before.
I'd say also following up on that, sort of what mentioned earlier, at the beginning of the program, there was 30 energy raters in the state, went up to about 150, 160. And now 5 years on, we're down at that 30 or below. So that's kind of maybe a warning of like, once the money goes, the jobs do go if if the program doesn't keep going. So be aware of that, train up too many people and then the demand goes away.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thanks for everybody for sticking around extra 5 minutes and for such a dynamic conversation. I appreciate it. And special thanks to Jimmy, Michael, and Ethan for presenting and also for volunteering to share your experiences. I really appreciate it. And for, like I said, if anyone is interested in the recording for this, just reach out to me directly so that I can send it to you. But with that, I will wrap things up for the day. Hopefully we'll see you guys again at our meetings next week. And of course, be in touch if anything comes up in the meantime. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.